this to the cloud and we're good to go. Cool.
Awesome.
So we're live on Facebook, which it's funny because going live on, oh, I need to say something. Say something about this video. Tune in. Okay, cool. And I tagged you so that people who were looking forward to hearing your greatness can now tune in. So hi everyone. If you are tuning in today, I am talking to my lovely friend and colleague, Jessica Alexander. I'll let her go ahead and introduce herself in a minute. But I'm super excited to have Jessica on today. She is going to be opening her own school very soon. And she is passionate about thinking about ways to get some toxicity and some white supremacy culture out of schools so that all kids can thrive and be successful and be their best selves. And she also, is very stylish, has a house, has a new pup. So maybe those things will factor therein, maybe they won't, but she is someone great to learn from. So Jessica, welcome. Feel free to just introduce yourself for those who don't know you.
Well, first, let me say thank you, Jenny, for having me. I love to talk about white supremacist culture and specifically how it infiltrates our schools on a daily basis. So I'm excited to dive into this conversation tonight. A little bit about me, Jessica Alexander. I live in Nashville. I'm opening a school in 2022. And some of the things that I'm going to talk about tonight are absolutely going to be true of the school that I open. Something else interesting about me, Jenny mentioned that I have a new puppy. Her name is Penny. We call her Penny the Diva, Penny Proud, Pennything is Possible. She has brought a lot of joy to my life in the last 24 hours. Yes, it's been just 24 hours. And we are already trying to get into potty training. So if you're on the live and you have chat ability, definitely drop me some
tips. Potty training pups is super fun. So let's start off, just tell us a little bit about your background. So who's your family? What do you do? What are you passionate about? What do you care about in education or just in life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the daughter of two military parents. And I always tell people that because I do think that the experience of being a child of the military has shaped my worldview in a lot of ways. I spent time in Tennessee, California, Washington State, South Korea before landing in Alabama. So it gave me a lot of opportunity to interact with people across socioeconomic statuses, across country, culture, language. And so it definitely gave me a broader perspective about our world. And I'm actually gonna just zoom in on a couple of places in particular. So I grew up I consider Washington and South Korea to be some of my more formative years. And again, it was super, super diverse. And so while I knew I was a Black child, I didn't always understand what that meant until I got to the South, until I moved to Alabama. And it was there that I saw the intersection of race and socioeconomics and how that impacts life for people of color on a daily basis. A very specific example, I went to a county school. It was considered to be one of the better middle schools in my area, and interacting with a family member and comparing textbooks and seeing that I had a textbook that was, while it was missing some critical history, which we'll talk about later, was a much newer textbook than the one my cousin was using. And recognizing that I was going to a school that was a new facility and having family members that were talking about some of the structural issues within their school building. So again, I think I became more acutely aware of race and socioeconomics as it pertains to life in the United States around the age of 12. And that's actually kind of what influenced my career choice. initially I wanted to be a lawyer because I had a few male cousins, few male family members who had spent a considerable amount of their life in prison for things that under any other circumstance would not have been the case. So I actually wanted to be a lawyer. I knew that was my life path, and I knew that was how I could make the most difference. And then I got to college and started thinking, yeah, that LSAT, not really feeling it.
I just have to say, though, you would be a phenomenal lawyer. So LSAT be damned.
Listen, it doesn't take away from my arguing skills. I can debate you. I can that is not changed. But I think what I began to understand is that the root cause of the issues that I saw within members of my family ending up in jail actually started in their schooling. Many of them had been suspended, arrested at school, and were in classrooms with, we'll call them Karens, people that didn't understand their context, didn't care enough to try to understand them. And so I recognized the school to prison pipeline within my own community, within my own family, and recognized that I would have a greater impact if I dug into the root cause rather than the spiraling effects.
And I mean, education has been very lucky that you made that choice.
Listen, it is absolutely my passion. I said for many, many years, oh, I would never teach. They don't make enough, which is not untrue. But I have just found it to be so rewarding, and I've learned so much about myself in the time that I've been an educator.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about your journey as an educator. What has your path looked like?
So I was one of those people who got tricked into Teach for America in 2010. And I say that with love in my heart, for sure. It was an unlikely path, but a path that I'm glad I took. So I moved to Memphis right after college, and I started in a Memphis city school off of Chelsea Avenue. Anyone who is from Memphis knows exactly what that means when I say off of Chelsea Avenue. And I was terrible. I went through orientation for Teach for America, teaching pre-K, and was hired to be a third grade teacher. And the only thing I knew about teaching entering that classroom was teach like a champion. That was what my district deemed was the most important thing for a first year teacher to know. And not only did they do me a disservice as an educator, they did my students a disservice, because I went in with a mindset that my priority was control. That my priority was to make sure that my kids walked on lines and my kids knew how to move from chair to desk within 30 seconds, rather than, hey, you should call this family and see what has been their experience with education so far. You should probably have lunch with this student and see, like, what are the things that drive him? What are the things that get him excited? And so I would say for the first couple of months of my career, I really struggled. Like, my classroom looked amazing, but I didn't know my kids. I didn't know, like, the things that made them excited about learning. It took me a little bit longer to acquire that skill and knowledge, and then to ultimately begin to love my job. The first 2 months, I hated it. I felt like I was just there to, like, make sure kids sat in their desks. And once I understood them and they understood me, we grew together so much that year. Actually looped with them, and that was a great experience. I would say I'm going to fast forward a little bit, because I know we really want to talk about some of the things with decolonizing our schools. So I'll fast forward to my time as an academic coach, which was my 4th and 5th year of teaching, and around the time that I met you, Jenny. That was when I was like, I was once again tricked. I wanted to stay in the classroom until I felt like I was a master teacher, but my principal was really adamant about my ability to have a broader impact if I worked with teachers. And I kept in mind some of the things that I learned my first year around, like, hey, these teach like a champion things. There's some things there that you can use, but that's not the foundation of what's going to make you a great teacher. That's not what's going to make your kids love you. And ultimately, which, you know, I think are all of our goals, that's not really what's going to close the achievement gap for our students. So I really started talking about, like, what does it mean to, like, be curious about your students, to be curious about their community, and to really take time on the front end to get to know them and love them and spend time with their families, so that you're able to really drive instruction and love of learning in your classroom. And now I'm in Nashville. I've been here for about 3 years. I'm an graduated assistant principal. I was assistant principal for 2 years, and now I am gearing up to open my own school. And so this year I'm really digging into what I want to be true about the school that I open, what I want to be true about the teachers that work there and the families that choose to enroll their students. And so I've been doing a lot of reading, really trying to make sure that I am also addressing my own internalized racism, unlearning some of the things that I've learned along the way that have been oppressive to teammates and students, and really trying to reimagine education.
I love it. I'm so excited for you to open your school.
I am too.
Tell me, what are some of your, you know, you've been talking about like some of the work that you're doing. What are some of your deepest beliefs as an educator?
Yeah, I think I was reading a text a couple of days ago, and something stood out to me. I was like, this is literally what I've always thought and never been able to put into my own words. And what she said is, like, the gray matter inside of your brain is unlimited, immeasurable, which means that your ability to learn and your learning potential is also unlimited. And that makes me feel like if our kids are nurtured, if our kids are loved, but also challenged, they can rise to any challenge we put in front of them. They have to know that we know that they can do it, and we have to give them the confidence too that they're able to do it. I also believe that our kids deserve to feel seen, to feel heard, and to feel loved. And that has to come out in every aspect of your school environment. From the time they get to that front office, they should see reflections of themselves. They should be affirmed. And that goes for their families as well. And then finally, and this is something that I've pondered over since that conversation I had with my cousin where we compared our textbooks, I just don't believe that where you live, your zip code, your parents' income should determine the quality of the teacher you have, the quality of the materials that are provided for you, or even the quality of the building that you're learning in.
Yeah, that really, that resonates with me a lot, all of those beliefs. I think, you know, as a special education teacher and administrator, I'm frequently surprised, disappointed, not surprised. Like, I don't have the feeling word. I probably have to go back to the mood meter and figure that out. But a lot of people have a really fixed mindset about, like, okay, like, that kid has a disability. We really need to test them. We really need to, and I'll say to them, like, well, sure, we can test them. Like, there'll be some rich data in there and we can potentially put them on an IEP, but maybe not. Maybe they don't qualify. And if they do qualify, like, what does that accomplish for you? And then once we have the label, like, that's not a permission slip to say that you can expect less of that child. It's actually a contract that you're making for the extra things you're going to do for that child.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I started learning about neuroplasticity and like the ability that you can just like keep growing. My first or second year of teaching, it was a little bit of Teach for America stuff, but then also some of my own research. And I've just always like had that, you know, and I've held it. And I think like the kids that you're able to convince that like they really can do anything and they really can grow, like it's so cool to watch that happen. But then to also have that sort of gut check feeling about like, well, why isn't that every kid? Like, why doesn't every kid see their potential and have an adult at school who thinks that they can be super successful? Yeah, so I'm excited for that to live in your values and in your school. I think that will be really exciting. So I know one of the things you wanted to talk about today was how to decolonize charter schools. Tell me a little bit about what that means, and then we probably have some school administrators and some teachers in the viewing audience. So what are some things that people can do towards that end for this school year?
Yeah, I am going to get on a little bit of a soapbox here, but you definitely, you know, feel free to like to jump in. Feel free to like ask, you know, if you want to go deeper, feel free to like jump in and ask another question. I feel super passionately about this, and I highlight charter schools because they tend to find their way into communities that are more populated by people of color, but it's not just charter schools. I mean, what I'm talking about is not exclusive to charter schools. White supremacy, colonization, it permeates our daily lives in a multitude of ways. I think of schools and teachers as being on the front lines of social justice and giving students the power of knowledge. However, creating a more equitable society will not be accomplished if we continue to tell half-truths and sacrifice culturally responsive teaching in the pursuit of academic excellence. I think there is a longstanding belief that you either teach social justice or you teach rigorously. And I think that that's a false narrative. And I've heard it in many school settings. You hear the words equity in the hallways and differentiation, but the professional development does not indicate that it's a priority. The conversations that we're having with parents don't indicate that it's a priority. And I would say that the curriculum does not indicate that it is a priority. And we all know the buzzwords to use, but few teachers are actually doing the work. And I think even fewer school leaders and networks are providing the necessary training to help teachers become more culturally responsive. So when I say decolonize charter schools, I mean, I'm sure somebody's gonna have something to say about this, but I mean, stop making Teach Like a Champion the holy grail. It is a useful tool, but it often communicates that control is more important than understanding. And if I'm honest, until this year, I was not involved in a teacher onboarding that did not begin with TLAC professional development. And I don't mean to take away the whole text in its entirety. There's some helpful tools there, but it is not the foundation for creating an anti-racist staff or an anti-racist environment for children of color to thrive in. So, of course, if you take something that has been so critical and so pivotal away, you have to have a replacement. And I would suggest that more networks, more school leaders are investing in texts such as How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi and Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain by Zaretta Hammond. I think that these are the kinds of texts that our teachers need to be digging into during onboarding so that they are understanding their role in perpetuating racism and the things that they can do to be anti-racist, as well as just understanding how the brain functions. I'm telling you, when I read Zaretta Hammond's book, I was just blown away. There's so many things that she stated that I never thought about but didn't think about it very deeply. And I think some shifts that we might start seeing is like, teachers moving away from talking about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks because it's Black History Month. That's not culturally responsive, that's performative. And so I wonder what shifts we would see if teachers were intentional about including socio-political context. And I'll just give a quick example. When I was in DC in 2016, I worked in a charter school, and 2016 was a very tumultuous year. We had multiple killings of Black men at the hand of police. We also had an election. And that year for teacher onboarding, I was given a text about etiquette. But when Donald Trump was elected, there was no conversation to be had. Mind you, nearly every kid in that building had only known a Black president. There wasn't a space for people to share what they were experiencing. And there wasn't any kind of assistance offered to our mostly white staff about how to engage in that conversation during a community meeting with students. So those mostly white teachers who taught mostly Black children went back into those classrooms and opened up phonics and number stories. That's not okay. That's just not okay to go back as if it's business as usual. And so I know that not everyone is equipped at this point to have those conversations because not everyone understands how power and privilege works because they're not being held accountable to know it. So I say that to say, one of the ways that we can go about doing this is making sure that the people that we put in front of children have done some identity work, and that they understand that that work is ongoing. And it's not enough to say, I am not racist. You need to be actively anti-racist. You cannot move in the direction of the conveyor belt. You have to work against it because it's all around us.
Sorry, letting that soak in for a minute because there were a lot of good nuggets of truth in there. Yeah, as I hear you talking, I'm definitely thinking there was a lot of aggressive nodding when you were talking about teach like a champion, both because of the notion of control, but also like teach like a champion to me is a set of strategies that works with a certain philosophy of learning, right? And so in order for teach like a champion to be like a successful implementation, you have to be designing things that can be taught whole group for the most part, and that have answers that you can sort of check, or like these steps and thought processes for direct instruction that like you don't always use. You know what I mean? Like a couple years ago, I was an administrator at a charter school, and I ran a math intervention class because we knew our personalized learning math software wasn't the business. And I would talk with my kids, and we would make up sets of steps to do things. But the input that I would always give is like, but this might not always work, which is why we have to use the math practices. You know, that's why you have to focus on perseverance and trying different strategies. And this is a strategy, but it's not the only strategy. And so, well, I appreciate Teach Like a Champion because some teachers really don't have any sense of like how to motivate a room of young people to do something productive. But it's like, you gotta, I mean, I think it might even be better, and I say this as someone who's not in a school right now, to like have a conversation about that person, about like what it is they're having a hard time with, and like what notions they're struggling with about power and control, and just organizing, because that tends to be part of it, right? Is like, is your instructional task something that you can have a manageable amount of feedback on? Or like having conversations with kids. But yeah, I hear you that a lot of people have held that up as like the be all end all of like, this is how we get effective teaching and this is how we get effective test scores. But you know, I visited a school that a couple of years ago that had great SBAC scores. They had like 70% proficient or something, which is really impressive. Like, I don't see a lot of schools that are at 70%. But also at the same time, like, I would go in the classrooms and like the kids are working and they're working on academics, but like it didn't really feel, I don't know, it just felt weird to me, you know? Like they're like very focused on these things, but I don't see any of that student energy going into like them organizing around their campus, or them feeling, you know, like they're proud to be a member of that school, which is cool, right? Like it's good to instill pride in your students, but what about pride in their community and pride in themselves, and like thinking about themselves as a member of the team versus like that team membership and being a student at that school being paramount. Yeah, so those were just some of the things that I had going on.
I also think too about like, where do you see that book showing up? I remember being in an interview with two former private school teachers and using the acronym TLAC. And they're like, well, what is that? And I was like, oh, teach like a champion, thinking the light bulb is going to go off. They don't have teach like a champion in a lot of these private schools and a lot of schools that are not serving Black and brown children. So that's another thing that I think about, like, where do we think that this is appropriate, and where are we saying like, this is where this should happen? So that's another thought that I had while you were sharing.
Yeah, you know what they do have at private schools? Art, music, robotics,
therapy.
Like, yep. All of those like cool resources that help your brain, because that's like how your brain processes trauma, right? Is through like reintegration and having outlets to express it. And I feel like that's one of the things that we take away from our kids, right? Especially our Black and brown kids, our low income kids, is we're like, you don't need that. You need to just have this reading program that's on phonics as a 7th grader until you get it.
You know, now we're getting off topic, but still on topic, obviously. But I even think about like some of the, you know, core values that a lot of our charter schools embody, or a lot of the words like grit. You know, just got to get gritty. You just got to be grittier. And, you know, I think about how oppressive that is to tell a child who is experiencing real trauma, well, we just got to push through. You just got to have grit. And it's so non-responsive and so tone deaf. And so I think that's also the issue that I have with TLAC, is that I think it gives people the excuse to not care, or to not show care to kids who need care. So like, there's like do not engage. Yeah, there's definitely times where you want to let a student know, we're going to talk about that later. But on the extreme, it's like, there's never a later. There's never a time to talk about it, because we have a test on Friday. We have a state test in 2 months. So that's what's measurable. Your feelings are not measurable. These test scores are measurable.
I do kind of wonder with COVID, because this year, obviously, we got a temporary reprieve from testing.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we're around the same age. So like, I remember when I started being state testing age, it was like the first big wave in Washington of state testing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting because my elementary school experience was not very much shaped by tests. Also, the tests back in those days were not terribly hard. It was all like,
They are definitely more difficult now.
yeah. But it wasn't. And then like No Child Left Behind was passed while I was in high school, and it didn't apply a ton because it, you know, Washington was already doing the mandated testing, but it got a little harder. But then since then, we've really been like dialing up that knob, you know what I mean? To where like,
Absolutely.
we almost can't imagine a world without.
I mean, like legitimately.
And so I like, you know, when I found out we were going to do distance learning, I immediately was like, okay, well, like, what an opportunity. Like, we want to teach kids how to use technology, right? Like, we're always talking about how they can't have smartphones at school because da 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 da. And like, this is your chance to make it really like they're in control of their learning because they're by themselves. So like, what are we going to do to prove to people, oh, look, we don't need tests anymore? Like, look at all of these, like, these kids made a website, or like they put together this like community organizing project. I was getting my oil changed today and I saw there's a little club of kids in Bakersfield. It's called Kids for Kids.
How cute.
And they go around to like different places where kids would be having a hard time. So they like have been going to the hospitals and the homeless shelters and like dropping off things for kids, like journals and pictures and like things to keep them entertained.
How sweet.
Yeah.
Love that.
But I'm like, oh, what a great project they did. And I'm like, oh, they didn't do that for school. Like, they did that on their own.
Yeah.
And I think like that's, I don't know, if I see kids doing stuff like that and they're like writing up campaign materials for their little fundraisers so they can keep like putting little sticker books in hospitals, like,
I love that.
I feel like that is so much more valuable. And I think like all this teaching to the test, we're doing it wrong. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
There are so few people, and we see more evidence of it now that we have social media and we get to see people's thoughts all the time.
Yep.
But people's critical reading ability and their ability to express what they're thinking in words, whether they're written or spoken, like, it's really going downhill at the like for the sake of Pearson making more money by making these tests.
I could not agree with you more. I even think back to like the kids that I went to college with and like how many kids had to go to remedial writing because that wasn't something that we spent as much time focusing on. So they were just like, you know, amazing mathematicians, but could not give you a complete thought, like commas everywhere. And so I worry, and when we talk about like our new teacher pot, or where we're getting these new teachers who are ready to lead our kids and help them to develop these 21st century skills, and like some of our new teachers are needing some remediation, and it's shown in the fact of like not being able to pass the praxis because they were a part of that No Child Left Behind, where certain pieces of their education were cut because they weren't tested. And if people weren't going to be held accountable for them, well, then why waste time there? We need to spend more time on these very like basic things, and all of these other things they can acquire at another time, and they just never got around to getting it. So one of the things that I'm working with are a few people around the city is like, we have some people who could absolutely be amazing teachers because of their passion and their heart and their desire, but who along the way have not been taught some of the things that they need to know to pass the praxis. So it's interesting to see how the things that you're talking about are actually impeding our ability to get more interested teachers into the building.
Well, and also, I remember a couple years ago in Washington, there was a law that didn't end up getting passed, which is frustrating, but it was about eliminating the basic skills test from teaching requirements because it doesn't actually seem to be impacting the quality of teacher. It really just more shows you what that person's socioeconomic status growing up likely was.
Oh, so kind of like the tests we take to get in some of our colleges?
On the nose. On the nose. But yeah, I'm curious to see where these next like several years lead. But I know you and I like to be future thinkers who are like, all the pieces, how do they fit together? But for anyone who's tuning in who like really wants to get into the nitty gritty of like, what can I do right now to be a better teacher or be a better administrator who is focused on dismantling systems of white supremacy culture in my school? Like, what's something that you would say they can do in the next couple weeks that will set them up for success?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you're tuned in is really great. It says that you're interested in knowing, like, what do we mean by decolonize? How does white supremacy infiltrate our schools? So that's a good start. But I always say, start with yourself. We have to do deep, deep, deep identity work. And this isn't just for white teachers. As a person of color, I have had to spend time understanding how I have internalized racism and had to also work against it to become more anti-racist. And it's not I've arrived. I'm still working on some things that are deep within myself to become better for the kids and families that I work with on a daily basis and to become better for myself. So you have to understand your biases. You have to uncover where those biases originate from. And you got to ask yourself, like, how does this manifest in the interactions I have with my team members, with the students, with the families that I encounter on a daily basis? And you need to listen to people of color. I have been in too many conversations where people came saying that they wanted to learn, but they wanted to talk. And sometimes you have to just be in a space where you are willing to listen. Listen to understand, not to rebut. There's an active unlearning that has to take place. I would also say, be curious, get into a text. You have to read. It's a lot of teachers who only read when it's time for the professional development book that gets sent to you. But you really have to be curious about yourself, how you are perpetuating white supremacy. You have to be curious about your students. You have to be curious about the community that you work in. And you have to be curious about systemic racism as a whole. And then I would say, you have to be culturally responsive, and it's not a surface thing. It's not performative. It's not a prescription. Like, I can't tell you here are the 3 ways to be a culturally responsive teacher. At the end of the day, it really is a mindset. You have to truly believe in the potential of every single student in your space, and you have to value their rich heritage and their linguistic diversity. And you have to bring that to the classroom daily. So no more of that, this is standard English. Guess what? Your Black children are also multilingual learners. They're not just, it's not just slang, it's an official language, okay? And then in terms of our school leaders, I would say that diversity, equity, and inclusion work at this point is just non-negotiable. And it's time to stop downloading these PowerPoints and presenting them. It's time to start investing in some consultants, some people who have dedicated their lives to this work, because the turn and talks and the PowerPoints and the at the end surveys, they're not producing people who are really, really trying to become anti-racist. And this is shown on a daily basis when I check into Facebook and see teachers disparaging the work that's going into Black Lives Matter right now. So again, you have to invest in the things that you care about. Our teachers have been programmed to believe that if it's not measured, it's not a priority. So one thing that my network is in the process of doing, we've partnered with Liberated and One Tilt, so that we can move from just having conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion to really getting to meaningful work and enduring understandings and personal work. And to make it measurable, we're doing equity audits, which hasn't been the most fun thing, but it's been incredibly enlightening. So some of the things that we look at is hiring and our student discipline records, amongst other things. So I think those are a few ways that our school leaders, network, and teachers can really begin to do the work of decolonizing our schools and making them a more welcoming environment for all of their children.
Yes. Yes. That is so important. Something that I would add is so as a teacher, I saw another teacher who did this, and I was just like, oh my God, why didn't I do that? And it's before school started every year, I would arrange meetings with every single student and their parents and talk to them about what their experience with school had been like and what they loved to do and what problems they had had at school previously. And I started doing it with the intention of just like, how can I make my classroom a place where every single kid can feel successful? And I've just always done it since then. As an administrator, I changed it a little bit. And I would choose to have meetings with the kids who had gotten referred the previous year. And not from a place of, here's what you have to do this year, but from a place of like, how was your summer? The first year I did it, I was meeting students, but years after, it was kids who'd been at the school who I just wanted to make sure that they were set up to have a more successful year the next year. And make sure that the family knows, like, this isn't like me versus you, like we're on the team for your kid. And I recognize that like there's some issues, right? Like systemic issues that I don't have control over as a school administrator. Like I can't control your family's interactions with the police system, except for that it's not going to happen on my campus. And I can't control your access to healthcare, but I can know those things and I can find resources for you. And if nothing else, I can show you compassion. And validate your experience as a human. And I think people always see those things as like a little extra and like a little bit of an overachiever, but I just feel like that's the way that school should be done. Like you would not show up to a doctor ready to perform surgery at the first appointment. You get to know them, you come up with a plan. And so teachers and school leaders, I would just encourage you to think of that as part of your job of like, how are you building the relationship with the family?
Absolutely.
And oftentimes that's a restorative relationship because a lot of people don't have good experiences with the school system, but they can start.
Absolutely. You can be the one that improves that experience. And I agree with you 100%, Jenny. I definitely think that especially now that we're virtual, and I'm only speaking for Nashville, I'm not sure if California has decided or your area, I know LA has, but it's such a great opportunity to like, hey, this is a very different experience than any of us have ever had. Tell me how you're dealing with it. Tell me what's going on with your family. Like just showing that you care genuinely about not just the school context, but like we're in a pandemic. We're fighting a pandemic and racial injustice at the same time. I'd love to hear like just how you're coping. So I think that's a really great point, Jenny.
Yeah. All right, so we're at the end of our time. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can people keep learning from you?
Oh, Jenny. Honestly, I only speak for me and my experiences, and I don't usually broadcast them much beyond my little Facebook family. So I think I would much rather suggest that people decolonize their bookshelves and join an affinity group or a conversation circle and really attempt to learn from that space.
All right. All right. I'm sure we'll see you in the news, maybe a 40 under 40 of school administrators or something to come. All right.
You know, who knows?
I'm going to sign us off of the lives. So bye, everyone.
Bye.
Okay,